Hello students, Miss Lockhart here. Let's make a grayscale painting. We'll be using our previous knowledge of making a grayscale with pencils, but now we'll be using paint. So let's get started with our sketch. Use your pencil to create a horizon line, which is that horizontal line from the left to the right side of the paper. And now do two vertical lines in the middle. Connect those lines with a curved line at the bottom and a curved line at the top. That curved line at the top will soon become an oval. So create another curved line at the top, and now you'll see your oval shape. And now you'll see your cylinder shape. So let's go ahead and start adding some value with our pencil. We're going to do our darkest shade here on the left, the middle shade in the middle, and then the lightest tint was on the right. So our gradient goes dark to light on the front of the cylinder. Now look at the inside of this oval. It's the opposite. The dark side is on the right, and then it gets light over to the left. And the reason is our light source is on the top right side, our imaginary light source. So it does create a shadow inside the oval or inside the cylinder. Okay. So you can pause this video to keep working on your cylinder, but don't worry too much about the shading on the cylinder as long as you understand how the shading does work within the cylinder. And then you can grab your paint and get your paint set up ready with your paintbrush and your water cup. We're going to be creating this value scale with 6 different values. Dark to light. Okay. So the darkest shade is what we're going to do first with just black. And we're going to do a little rectangle here at the bottom left side of our paper. This is our number 6 shade, the darkest one, which is just black. Now the goal is to create lighter shades above it that get lighter all the way to the lightest tint, which was that number 1. So we need to add white to our number 6 or our black so that it can be a little bit lighter. So let's add some white to our mixing palette. Now I'm using the lid to the painting container here for a mixing palette. You can use a paper plate or just another piece of paper to mix your colors or to mix your shades. So I'm mixing white with black to create a lighter shade. And you can go ahead and do the same. So the very bottom rectangle I already painted will be the darkest, and the one above it will be 1 step lighter. So it's still quite dark. It is a dark shade still, with a little bit of white mixed in. And now for the next shade, which will be a little bit lighter. So we did number 6, we did number 5, and now for number 4. So we'll need to add more white. So that number 4 can be our middle value. Okay, so you can see I'm mixing white with the black. And you can always hold your paint palette or your paintbrush next to your paint to see if it's a good transition or a good step lighter. And it is. I like that. It is a bit lighter than the step before it, but that's okay because we do have to make our way all the way up to that light number 1 tint. So we do need to start to add a lot of white. So let's go ahead and do the next level up. So add some more white to your mixture. And I believe this is number 3 that we're working on. So we're getting closer to the tints now. We are actually making tints now. So when you have more white with whatever color you're using, you've then created a tint, which is a lighter shade. So I've mixed this tint and I am happy with it. It is lighter than the shade before it, don't you think? That is our goal. We want a gradient, dark to light. I'm happy with that one. And remember, you can pause this video whenever you want. Now I'm adding more white for my next tint, which is one of the lightest shades. So you need a lot of white and just a little bit of black here in this mixture. And look, I'm kind of looking and holding it up next to the tint before it to see if it's light enough, and it is. So I'm gonna fill this next spot in. Now my scale isn't like a perfect row. They're overlapped and they're stacking one on top of another, which is totally fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. So we just did number 2, one of our lightest tints. Now notice I didn't leave any room for number 1, which is essentially just white. So in a minute, I'm actually gonna go over that when it's a little bit drier with some white just to fill it in at the very top. But since I have so much of this color, I'm gonna go ahead and start filling in my background and foreground with the middle shades. So the 3 or the 4, just go ahead and use your excess paint to fill in the background, and then the foreground is the front. In the foreground, you have a shadow. Now, the shadow is super important because it helps us understand the form that is created with the gradient. So we really need that dark shadow. And you can make it any shape that you want. You can see mine is sort of just like a curved shape that connects to the bottom of the cylinder. Now I know that was sped up, so please pause the video to finish your shadow and your foreground, which is the tabletop. Now remember, the shadow is going to be the darkest shade on our painting. So do make sure that shadow is nice and dark. Maybe just use black. And then you use the rest of your extra paint, which are those middle values, to fill in the background and the foreground. So I just repeated that again because I know it went kind of fast. You can pause this whenever you want. And now is actually a great stopping point. If you need to take a break, you can come back to this another time when you're feeling ready to finish the cylinder. Before I do finish the cylinder, I want to finish my grayscale over here on the left. Remember how I needed my number 1, my lightest tint? Well, I just added that on top and overlapped that on top of the number 2 tint I did before, just so that you could really see the gradient dark to light. Now, I'm gonna really make sure my brush is good and clean when I start to use my light tints because we don't want it to be too dark, right? So we need to get off all that dark paint from our brush before we really start using that white tinted shade. So my brush is ready. Now that I've finished my grayscale on the left, I'm gonna start on my cylinder. So go ahead and get ready. We're essentially doing the same thing we just did on the left, but in our divided up cylinder. Remember, we already divided it up before. So the first step is to go ahead and get white on your brush, and we're going to do the light tint in our cylinder. Now, when we did our preparation and our sketch, you will remember that the lightest tint in the inside of the cylinder on that oval was on the left, and on the right side, on the front of the cylinder. So it's the opposite. So the lightest tint is on the right side of the front of the cylinder, and then on the left side of the inside oval on the top. Okay, so I'm covering up my drawing using the same shades that I drew with my hatch marks before. So this needs to be my darkest, one of my darkest shades, which would be like a 5 or a 4. And in the middle, it's gonna be about a 3. And I'm referring to the chart on the left. Remember, it goes 6 to 1. 6 is the darkest. So right now, I'm gonna be making probably about a 5 because it does have a little bit of white mixed in, doesn't it? So I'm making a pretty dark shade, but it's not the darkest shade. The darkest shade on the painting is the shadow. This one here on the left is probably about a 5. It's just a little bit lighter than the shadow. And I'm filling it in here on the left side of the front of the cylinder cup. You can see I'm using the edge of my brush and the corner of my brush to get the space that I want to paint. So rotate your brush around and experiment. It's been a while since we painted together, so please give yourself some room to make mistakes. That is what this is all about, just getting familiar with paint and using our previous knowledge of grayscales. Now you can see I've started the darkest shade on the inside of the oval, and remember that's on the right-hand side of the oval. Okay, so I did my light tint, my dark shade. Now I need the middle shade, so that'll be somewhere about a 3 or a 4 if you're thinking back to the numbers associated with the grayscale on the left. So it's somewhere in the middle of the grayscale now is what I'm trying to accomplish. So I am mixing my white and my black together, and I'm really holding it up next to my grayscale on the left to see, is this somewhere in the middle? Is this a middle shade, or is this a tint, or is this super dark? I think that's pretty close to middle. That's like a 4, don't you think? So I'm gonna put that down in the middle. Now it isn't really blending in with the left or the right side, so I'm gonna show you how to blend it in just a few. But that is essentially what our goal is. Do you see? It's just dark, middle, and light in the oval and in the front of the cup or oval. Great. So we've essentially done it. Good job, everybody. Now we're just going to add the little tints and shades between. And that also happens when you blend them together. So check it out. So I'm going to go ahead and try to blend that a little bit. Well, and it's sort of dry, so I'm going to need to mix the color that I want. So I kind of want to get a number 2. So I need it to be really light. So I'm adding a lot of white to just a little bit of black, because I'm going to try to make the transition here on the left a little bit smoother. So now it goes from 1 to 2 to a 3 or 4. And remember, I'm referring to the numbers of the grayscale on the left. The white is a number 1. So I just filled in with a 2 or 3 shade on our scale, and I'm just sort of moving it over to the right. And you can sort of start to see a gradient. And I'm going to do the same thing here on the front of the cup, where instead of it just going from 5 down to 2, I want to have maybe like a 4 and a 3. So it's dark and it's a 5, and then now you can see the 4, and then you can start to see the gradient go from dark to light. And I'm just adding the color that I need. So I'm gonna remix what color I need next. So I'm gonna try to fix the part where on the right side of the vase, you see how it doesn't quite transition very well? On the lightest side on the very right, it's like the number 1. And then it goes all the way to like a 4 or a 3. So I need to do a 2, which is quite light. So I need to mix a lot of white with a little bit of black. And I'm going to sort of fix this spot right here, so it has more of a transition to the next shade. So I did the 2, and it kind of blended on top of the 3 or 4 in the middle, since it was wet, since that paint that I just put down was still wet. It was able to blend when I put it side by side. And I'm going to use that same tint that I just mixed and try again on the left over here and the top. Okay, so I can start to really see the grayscale in my cup or in my cylinder now. I'm going to kind of fix it up a little bit here. And now all of your cylinders are going to be a little different than mine and from each other, which is great. So you can just adjust it and add things you need. Like right now I'm going to add the darkest shade again, and I'm going to add the lightest tint again to really amp up the contrast. So I'm going to put almost just black on my brush for the darkest shade again on the left. Oops, I went over the line there. That's okay. You can always fix things since you are the artist. That's what's so fun about making art. There's never a mistake, really, you can't fix. And look, I just added the darkest shade on the right side inside the cylinder. Okay, so I'm pretty happy now with my gradient on my cup, but I'm gonna tidy it up since I did paint outside of the lines in a few places, like that last spot right here. I'm gonna clean my brush real well and dry it off, and then I'm just gonna use the edge of my brush to sort of clean up any edges that might have gotten some paint in them that you didn't mean for. So practice that. Clean your brush and dry it off, and then you can use that brush as kind of like a scoop and scoop away things you don't need. You can also add your lightest tint, which is just white. And look at that. It really pops once you add your light. It's like a highlight. That's where the pretend light source is hitting our cylinder the most, and it's hitting it right here on the left side of the oval on the inside of our cylinder. Now you can really start to see the gradient after you add lightest light and the darkest dark once more. I'm going to clean my brush and just sort of scoop up the little edges here to make them nice again, since I did paint outside the lines. This painting is not about perfection. This painting is just about understanding gradients and how to mix them with paint. So don't worry if it's perfect. And now for the last step, go ahead and outline your horizon line with black to separate the background from the foreground, just in case those two shades got a little too similar. You can always put a dark black line right there on the horizon line to separate the background from the foreground. Once again, and we are getting quite close to finishing here. Now I'm just going to tidy it up some more, and I mixed another middle value, like a number 4, just to sort of clean up the edges around my cylinder so that it's a little cleaner looking and the edges are a little sharper now. Go ahead and add any shades or tints you would like to finish your painting.